starting with cardio. More seconds. And stop, and then step your feet wide into a straddle. You can let your hands rest lightly on the ground. If it's hard to touch the ground here, you can always grab a couple blocks and make it a little bit easier. And just wiggle around a little so you can kind of drop one hip, drop the other hip, wiggle in whatever way that helps you to feel a little bit looser in your hips and your inner thighs. And don't go like as deep as you possibly can go. This is just like a little bit of like a warm-up. And then walk your hands over towards one foot and squat towards that heel. Turn your opposite foot up. It's okay if your bottom heel needs to lift and maybe someday it'll drop down. Totally fine if that doesn't happen today. And then walk your hands over toward your other foot, squat on that heel, turn your other foot up, yearn that bottom heel towards the ground. Again, it's okay if it doesn't touch. And go back and forth a few times. This is a little warm up for the legs and just a diagnostic check-in. So again, don't push it. And then turn towards your right leg. You can drop the back knee down if you want to make this a little bit easier. Otherwise, you can keep the back knee lifted and bend your front knee and then yearn your front leg towards straight. Bend your front knee, yearn your front leg towards straight. It's okay if your front leg doesn't straighten all the way, but it's just, again, a little bit of movement, a little bit of check-in. How's your body feeling today? And move at your own pace. You can go faster or slower, it's up to you. Whatever speed works for you. Good, and you can either step switch or hop switch. Same thing, option for back knee down to make this a little easier. Back knee lifted, a little harder. You can bend the front knee, you're in the front leg towards straight. And again, this is not, the goal here is not necessarily to get more flexibility in this moment. It's just to get the muscles a little bit warmer and a little bit looser and just to check in with how they're doing today. So again, you're not going farther than your body is capable of going. And then step back to a plank pose. And Michaela, if you want to do this on your forearms, if your wrists hurt, that's fine. We're just going to hold a plank for about 30 seconds just to get your core alive, get your heart rate up, get your arms to feel a little bit more stable. Squeeze your glutes, pull your ribs in and extend through your shoulders. Sometimes it's nice to also make circles over your wrists, just warming up your hands a little bit. And switch directions. Good, and then drop your knees to the ground. Come back to sitting on your heels. And then sweep your arms out wide up and overhead. Interlace your fingers, flip your palms up, and roll around in circles. This is my ultimate favorite movement. I feel like it taps into so many different nooks and crannies of the upper body. And make sure you can breathe the whole way around. And switch directions. You're welcome to make these circles a little wider if you're able, or shallower if needed. Good, and then take your arms behind your back, interlace your fingers, stretch your knuckles back, open up the front of your chest, and then exhale, bow to your knees and stretch your knuckles away from your hips. Take a few deep breaths there. Good, and then come back to upright, and I'm going to show from the side a little bit more specifically. By the way, if your feet hurt at all, or if your knees or anything hurt, you can always readjust your seat. We're focusing on the upper spine here. So you want to think about tucking your tailbone, pull your low belly in, but stretch your knuckles towards the floor regardless, so that you're opening up your upper spine. And can everybody hear me? You can give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, great. So you're thinking, pull the low belly in, but reach your knuckles back and down so that you're opening up your upper spine. And you're not arching your low back to get your knuckles down. That can come later, but we're just focusing on the upper spine now. Take a deep breath there. And then let's go back and forth between that folded position, knuckles away from your hips, and then sitting up, upper spine bend, lower belly pulls in, tailbone tucked. Do that a couple more times. Good, and then let it go and come down to laying on your belly. And bring your elbows underneath your shoulders. So I want to focus on the upper spine again, and I like to focus on upper back bending before lower back bending almost always, because the upper back does not bend as easily as lower back does. So if you focus on lower back bending, you're missing out on completing including the entire spine in your back bend. So when you think arch, think not arching your low back and letting your belly drop, but think about pulling your low belly in, squeeze your butt, and then reach the front of your chest forward and up. And I like to think about kind of dragging my elbows back and spreading my collarbones wide to make that happen. And feel free to give me a nod if you understand the difference between like upper back and lower back bending. Yeah, cool. Yeah, you should feel this more in your mid back than in your lower back. And then we'll do the opposite. Now you'll hollow, pull your ribs in, and then see if maybe you can float your knees off the ground. If you can't, just drop your knees and lift just your hips. And then drop your hips, think front of the chest up and forward. And then exhale, pull your ribs in, lift your hips, maybe also your knees. And do that transition a few more times on your own. Good, and then take your hands underneath your shoulders, press back to a downward facing dog, and just wiggle around a little. Checking out how your hamstrings and shoulders are feeling, how your calves are feeling. You can bend one knee, bend the other, and sway your hips from side to side. Good. And then step your right foot through between your hands. Drop your back knee to the ground and then swivel your back shin in 90 degrees and straighten your right leg. So we're coming into kind of like a half straddle or like a half center split. Yeah, good. So now we're thinking lower belly kind of sticks out. You're thinking like tailbone up towards the ceiling and then imagining dropping your elbows down towards the ground if they can make it. And you can play around with going a little farther back towards your heel, a little bit farther forward towards your knee. And we're just kind of like getting into that right inner thigh. And if you find a spot where you're like, ooh, that's the perfect stretch, you can stay there. If you can't quite find it, you can play around with sliding your right foot a little farther out, maybe sinking your hips a little farther back. And this entire practice is really about taking care of your own body and checking in with all the sensations that you feel, so you never want to push yourself past your limits, or if something that I'm suggesting doesn't feel right, you're never obligated to do anything that doesn't feel right, but feel free to ask questions if you're confused at any point. So now we're going to do a little bit of PNF here. And by the way, if your bottom knee feels sensitive, you can always pad it with like a folded up towel or a pillow or a folded up blanket or something like that. So PNF stands for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is the act of engaging your muscle and then stretching it. So what you want to think about is press your right foot down and almost think about like squeezing your knee in toward your foot. So you're trying to engage this inner thigh. And then start to stretch it a little bit more. Again, that could mean sliding your foot a little farther out or your hips a little bit farther back. Yeah, and then push your foot down, squeeze your knee in toward your foot for 3, 2, 1, and then sink a little deeper. And then squeeze in for 3, 2, 1. And sink a little deeper. And when you sink deeper, it's only just enough to feel the stretch, not to like push too hard. And then squeeze, feel your muscle engage. And then sink a little deeper. You might even walk your foot a little farther out, it's up to you. And squeeze in. And stretch. Just a couple more, just like this. Squeeze in. Stretch. Cool. All right, and then walk your hands back flat to the ground. Step back to your hands and knees, and excuse me, if you need to, roll that right hip around in circles just to kind of get a little circulation in there. Do a little check-in, a little diagnostic moment. And by the way, I invite circular movement all the time, even if I don't suggest it. If you kind of intuitively feel like that's what your body needs, feel free to do it even if I don't mention to do it. All right, other side, go ahead and step your left foot forward. And then swivel that right foot in 90 degrees, straighten that left leg. And first off, just starting by finding that stretch in your inner thigh wherever that happens to be for you. So maybe that means keeping your hands flat and your arms straight. Maybe it means dropping your elbows down. Maybe it means sinking your hips farther back or farther forward. Maybe it means walking that left foot a little farther to the left. And we're not doing PNF quite yet, just find the stretch and breathe. And again, think about like sticking your tailbone towards the ceiling, your belly dropping, a little bit of an arch in your spine, if possible. Take another deep breath. Good, and we'll do a little PNF. Again, the goal is to engage the muscle and then stretch it. So press that left foot down and squeeze your knee in toward your foot for 3, 2, 1, and then find a stretch. So that could mean sliding the left foot farther out, could mean sitting the hips a little farther back, and then squeeze in for 3, 2, 1, and then stretch. And then squeeze in for 3, 2, 1, and stretch. And then squeeze in 3, 2, 1, and stretch. A few more times, squeeze and feel the muscle engage for 3, 2, 1, and stretch. Good, 2 more, squeeze in 3, 2, 1, and stretch. And squeeze in last time, 3, 2, 1, and stretch. Good, and then find that tabletop and roll that left leg around in circles. Do whatever you need to do to kind of feel good and loosen your body. Switch directions. Good, now I want to do a little bit of a different glute work than we usually do. I'm just going to demonstrate first, especially if you have a hard time seeing the camera from, or seeing the screen from lying on your back. I'm just going to show real quick. So you're going to start from, it's kind of like a bridge pose, but instead of bridge, you have your feet in yoga, they call this Baddha Konasana or bound ankle pose. Your feet are together, knees wide, like this. And then you're squeezing your butt to press the outer edges of your feet into the ground to lift your hips, and then drop your hips. And then press the outer edges of your feet down to squeeze your butt, lift your hips, tuck your tailbone. Try to really get your tailbone to scoop under, and then drop your hips. So let's do that 20 times on your own. So go ahead and lie on your back. I'm gonna let you guys count. So squeeze your butt, lift your hips, and lower back down. Squeeze your butt, lift your hips, tuck your tailbone, lower back down. If you feel like you're using your lower back to do this at all, then tuck the tailbone a little bit more, squeeze your butt a little bit tighter. You shouldn't feel this in your low back. And the reason we're pushing the outer edges of the feet into the ground instead of the soles of the feet is we're trying not to use the thighs and hamstrings, but we're trying to isolate the glutes. Good, once you've done 20, find a happy baby pose so you can grab onto the outer edges of your feet, rock from side to sides, just loosening up your hips and your lower back. Good, and then rock yourself up to sitting. We'll make our way into a wide-legged straddle. And now that we already did that PNF work on the inner thighs, it's possible that you might be able to widen your straddle a little bit. You can even use your hands to kind of make your legs a little bit wider. And then we're going to use our hands on the ground to do kind of like a body roll. So squeezing your knees tight, you're going to start by dropping your head and rounding your spine down, and then lifting your chin and letting your spine kind of like arch, and think about letting your pelvis come forward at the end. And then again, drop your head, rounding down, and then lift your chin, arching up. We're gonna do 20 of these and see if you can keep your legs super active. Drop your head, round down, and arch up. And if you feel like you're not able to get any movement in your pelvis, you can sit up on a block, and that might help give you a little bit more freedom of movement in your pelvis. So you can do the same thing on a block, dropping your head, lifting your chin. And if it helps, you can even put a second block underneath your hands so that you have a little bit more freedom to move. Again, try not to let your legs be soft. Squeeze your knees, point your toes or flex your feet. And it doesn't matter necessarily if it's a point or a flex as long as your feet are active. And now if you've done 20, you can stop. If your legs are super, super wide, like almost 180, bring them in just a touch so that you have a little bit more leverage to push down into your legs. Because if you're at 180, you're kind of just gonna like fall because there's nothing to push into with your feet. So legs in just a little bit less wide than 180. And we're gonna bring arms overhead, push down with your feet, and then come as far forward as you can, really reach through your hands and then press through your feet to come back up. We're gonna do another 20 like that. Again, make sure your legs are active. I lost count, but 3 more. Awesome. All right, and pull your legs back in. Sometimes it's nice to do a little bit of a glute release. You can drop your knees to one side and then drop your knees to the other side. And if you pass over a spot that feels like a really nice massage for your glutes, you can kind of iron over it a few times. Alright, so we're bouncing a little bit back and forth between back bending and straddle work today. So when you're complete with that, come down to lying on your belly again. We'll do 5 more of those Sphinx arch and hollows. So a reminder is it's not a lower back bend so much as it's a coming out of the lower back and then spreading the collarbones wide, shoulders back, ribs forward, trying to think mid back bend, and then press into your forearms to engage your core, lifting your hips. Do that 5 more times. Good. Once you've done 5, take your hands underneath your shoulders. And again, a reminder, these are arch ups, like kind of like a cobra, but using more of your back muscles to lift your chest. Think about using your hands to drag your hands back to lift the front of the chest up and forward first before going back, and then come back down. See if you can do most of the work with your back muscles and less of the work with your hands. And it's okay if you only come up like, you know, a little bit. Eventually, someday you'll get more range of motion in your arch ups. Once your back gets a little bit more limber and stronger. Let's do like 5 more, just like this. And if your pubic bone ever feels sensitive on the floor, you can always pad your hips with a pillow or a folded up blanket or something like that. And this shouldn't be painful. If it is at all painful, see if you can come up less, use your back muscles to lift your back more. If your arms are tired, use your back muscles more. And then press yourself up to sitting on your heels again. We'll do another circular motion. Interlace your fingers, flip your palms up, roll around in circles. Just ironing out the spine a little. And as long as it's not painful, you can even think about stretching your arms even farther back throughout these circles, so you're including a little bit of a shoulder opener and back bend in that circular motion, and then switch directions. Good. And then we'll do a little bit of arch and hollow from the seated position. If your ankles are uncomfortable or if you need to sit on a pillow, that's fine. So take your hands to the fronts of your knees and try and make the front side of your body as tight and as small as you can. As you lean back, tuck your tailbone, pull on your knees, and then drop your head. Take a couple deep breaths. And this should feel really good after all of that back, all of that arch ups that we just did. It feels nice to stretch the muscles of your back. And then come back to neutral. This time take your hands on your thighs, push down into your hands to kind of get tall through your spine, but then lift the front of your chest, think elbows back and ribs forward, and then lift your chin. If your lower back hurts at all, tuck your tailbone a little bit. And then tuck your chin, hands to the fronts of your knees, hollow, engage your core, drop your head, tuck your tailbone, squeeze your butt. And do that same thing a couple more times back and forth. Push down through the hands, elbows back, ribs forward, chin lift, belly pulls in. And then engage your core, hands forward, drop your head. A couple more times just like that. Good. And then come back to neutral. I'm gonna grab a little padding for my own knees. We're doing frog pose, and sometimes for me personally, I find that my knees get really sensitive on the inner knees. So grab something that's a little, if your knees are sensitive, grab a little extra padding. What I'm using today is 2 folded up towels, which you can do whatever you have available nearby. And we're taking knees to the padded areas, and then feet slightly wider than your knees, and hips a little bit farther back than your knees, and then elbows, if you can, to the ground. And go just as far as you feel a stretch. Part of the reason that I personally like to do 2 separate things underneath the knees is if you want to kind of like slide together or slide apart, it gives you a little bit more slidey freedom. So it's up to you, whatever you have available nearby is fine. So just stretching, we're not necessarily doing anything super fancy here quite yet. Just make sure you can breathe, make sure it's not painful. 2 more breaths. And now we're going to do a little bit of a PNF, but this time including a little arch and hollow with the spine. I'm going to do a little bit of a sideways view so that you can see what my lower spine is doing. So when we engage the inner thighs, I'm going to squeeze my knees in, but also hollow. So I'm pulling my low belly in and hugging my knees in together. And then when I stretch, I'm going to arch and see if maybe my knees slide a little bit farther apart and maybe my hips go a little farther back. And again, no farther than your body's comfortable going. Don't push yourself. And then squeeze in, tuck your tailbone, pull your knees in towards one another. And then arch, sink hips back, feel a stretch. Okay, keep that up. And you might notice that you might go a little bit deeper each time. And as a reminder, we're feeling an engagement when we hollow, and we're feeling a stretch when we arch. Do a couple more of these. And also, by the way, someday when your middle split is really comfortable, you'll be doing this in a middle split with your legs straight. Same thing, you'll be hollowing, squeezing your legs in, and then arching. But the frog is the less intense variation. Good, and then push your hands down to the ground. If you need to, you can kind of come forward with your hips first before you slide your knees together, if that's an easier way to kind of exit this, depending on how deep you went. And then hands and knees make circles with one leg at a time. You can make those circles as wide or as shallow as you want. Make sure you get to both legs. And then come down to a Baddha Konasana again, so that seated bound angle pose. Feet together, knees wide. And feel free to do anything that helps you feel a little bit kind of like getting tuned with what the shape feels like. If it feels good to make circles, and I was just doing this a moment ago. And then switch directions. Landlord is cutting trees. I don't know if you can hear it. Can you guys hear that? No? A little bit, okay. If it gets kind of loud, I can close my door, but let me know. Alright, cool. So now we're going to do a little bit of PNF here. There's a few different ways to do this. We're going to start by squeezing the feet together to engage the inner thighs, and then relax the feet and fold just as far as you feel a stretch. And then same thing, push your feet together for 3, 2, 1, and then fold as far as is comfortable. Keep that up. Keep doing that. I'm just going to close my door. So you're squeezing your feet together to feel an engagement in your inner thigh and your groin, and then folding. Alright, cool. So now we're going to do something slightly different here. This time, you're gonna take your hands on your knees and push your knees into your hands. So it's kind of like you're engaging your groin to push your knees up, and then you can let your knees relax down and again, fold forward as far as is comfortable. And then push your hands into your knees, or push your knees into your hands, and your hands are giving resistance. And then relax and stretch. Good. Keep doing that. And then let your knees fold together. You can do another little windshield wiper with your knees from side to side. We'll check in how your hips and lower back are feeling. Alright, how are we feeling so far? Everybody's body feeling dandy? Feeling good? Alright, I want to revisit back bending, and then we're going to come back to just a little bit more straddle work. Alright, so another set of arch ups. So you're coming down to your belly, hands by your shoulders, or you can widen your arms out wide to the side, squeeze your butt, and use just your back muscles to lift your chest. Just your back muscles to lift your chest. To make that even harder, you can bring your arms out in front of you and do the same thing. It's a little bit harder. We're going to do a set of 10 of these. And this exercise is a little bit nicer to do when you either have somebody stepping on your feet, or you have just something grounding your feet in general, like putting your feet underneath a couch or underneath a bed frame or something like that. If your pelvis is sensitive on the ground, you can pat it. Yes, nice, Sarah. You can get so much higher when you have somebody stepping on your feet. All right, just a couple more. Good. And then the next time you're at the top, as long as there's no pain in your back, you might straighten your arms and think about kind of like using your elbows to scoop your rib cage forward. Widen your collarbones. Try not to close the front of your chest, but let your collarbones widen. And if it feels okay to add your upper spine, you can lift your chin and let your head drop back a little bit. And breathe. And this is another little progress moment where you can bend your knees and see how close your head is to your toes. But don't force yourself. Couple more breaths. Good. And then lower your chest down to the ground. Sometimes it's nice to make a pillow with your hands underneath your forehead and rock your hips from side to side, just releasing your back. Good. And then a little bit of recovery. Come back to a comfortable seat. I personally like to sit on my heels, but if you prefer to sit cross-legged or something other than that, feel free. We'll do a little bit of side bending. So take one hand to the side, sweep opposite arm out, up and over. And if it feels nice for your top shoulder to make circles here, feel free. Again, you can always sneak in circular movement in many places. This is a good one. And you can imagine that every time your top arm goes back behind you, let your palm face up and let it hang back so you're opening up the front of your shoulder. And switch directions with your top arm. Eventually someday your bottom elbow might make it to the ground, but no pressure to go there today. Good. And then dive down towards your knees and make your way to the other side. Side bending the other way. And then take your top arm in big circles. And that top arm, when it goes back behind you, let it be heavy back there, reaching your palm facing up, reaching that hand towards the floor behind you, and switch directions. Again, maybe your bottom elbow is a little closer to the ground, maybe not. Good, and then come back through center. We're going to do that same hollow and arch we did before. So hands on the fronts of your knees, tuck your tailbone, squeeze your butt, engage your core, drop your head. And then hands on your thighs, push down to get tall through the lower back, and then open the chest, lift the chin. And then hands on the fronts of the knees, tuck your tailbone, pull your low belly in, drop your head. And arch. Do that a couple more times on your own. Good. Come back to neutral. And we'll revisit that wide-legged standing forward bend that we did at the beginning of our practice today. And notice if maybe you can let your chest drop a little farther down than you did at the beginning of class. If it feels nice to kind of make circles with your hips or kind of make figure eights with your hips, do any movement that feels good here. And then squatting down on one heel, so that Skandasana half squat shape that we did before. Maybe your heel gets a little closer to the ground, maybe your hip gets a little closer to your heel, and then maybe you don't touch the ground with your hands. And then transitioning to the other side again, flipping toe up, heel down, and we'll go back and forth a few more times, maybe not touching the ground throughout that transition, trying to keep your hips as low as you can. Good, and then the next time you land in the right side half squat, sit all the way down. So you have your right knee tucked into your chest, and your left foot can either be pointed or flexed, it's up to you. And then left hand wraps around your right shin, and then side bend towards your straight leg. And take a few deep breaths. Good, and then lift your torso back up, and this time, that right knee that's tucked into your chest, cross your right leg over your left leg, so you're in kind of like a cross-legged seat, as if you were like sitting in the chair, but your bottom leg is straight. And we're gonna fold over that bottom leg. If you need to kind of scooch your sit bones back a little bit, you can, and then fold over your bottom leg. And I find that with the crossed leg over the bottom leg, it helps to really yearn that bottom leg straight, and also kind of stretches the T-band a little bit more in the bottom leg. So you might feel this in the outside of your left leg a little bit more. Yeah, I saw Anna nodding. I can feel it. And breathe. Sometimes it's nice, especially towards the end. We're kind of like getting to like the last 10 minutes of class today. Sometimes it's nice to drop the head, starting to like soothe the nervous system a little bit, so feel free to relax the back of your neck. And start to slow down your breath a little bit. Take one more deep breath. And then widen your legs back into a straddle again. Make some circles. We're going to revisit the second side in a moment. And you might even take note, does one leg feel different than the other? Does it not? Is it subtle? Is it obvious? And these questions are more about just inspiring your own level of awareness and sensitivity to your body. There's no right or wrong answer to those questions. Good. And then make your way to that standing wide-legged forward bend again. You can transition there however you need to. And we'll do another last set of that Skandasana transition, going to half squat to half squat. You can use your hands on the ground if you need support. You can take your hands off the ground if you want to challenge yourself. It's up to you. This is a lot of hip and straddle work today, so if you're sore tomorrow, that's normal. You can take a bath, drink some electrolytes, massage yourself. All right, the next time you're in a left side half squat, sit all the way down. And again, you can flex or point that right foot, it's up to you. Take right hand to the left shin and side bend towards your straight leg. And breathe. Good, and then sit back up again. And cross that left leg over your right leg. So it's like a half cross-legged seat. If you want more of a stretch in your calf, you can flex that right foot, or you can point it, whichever one feels better. And then fold forward. And if you feel like there's direct pressure on your kneecap, like on your patella, it could mean that your leg isn't crossed enough. If your shin is kind of over your kneecap, see if you can pull your shin farther back so that your outer thigh is on top of your bottom thigh rather than directly on your kneecap. So if you feel any pain in your knee, see if you can take pressure off of it. You can drop your head if that helps you to kind of relax into the pose, getting your nervous system to kind of soften a little bit. Take a few more deep breaths. And then sit back up again. Make your way into that straddle one last time. And you can choose to either do a few more circles if that intuitively feels really good, or you can walk your hands as far forward as is comfortable. You might rest your elbows either on the ground or on a block. Maybe someday you go all the way down, and it's really just whatever your body has available to you today. you're trying to go all the way down, notice if you're doing it with a very rounded spine, and see if it's possible to get your pelvis to kind of rotate forward a little bit more. Yeah, so it's not just your spine rounding forward. And if you're confused what I mean by that, it's the difference between this and that. So it's like instead of the hollow, it's an arch. And notice if I also have a bad habit of when I arch forward, my foot goes with me. I kind of like internally rotate the foot, but see if you can keep, so if you were to flex your feet, your toes would stay pointed up as you bring your pelvis forward, so you're not doing that, which I have a bad habit of doing that myself. But some people have an easier time externally rotating, some people have an easier time internally rotating, and that's just a whole other conversation about different body types. And take one more deep breath. Good, and then lift yourself back up. All right, let's just do like one more little spurt of back bending. So if you feel comfortable going into a wheel, you can take your hands to the ground by your shoulders, squeeze your butt, lift your hips, kind of like we did at the beginning of class, and then press into your hands to lift your back off the ground. If that doesn't come super naturally to you today, I'm going to show the variation with blocks against the wall. You can take your blocks on a diagonal against the wall, take your head between the two blocks, and then hands on the blocks about shoulder width, and then press into your feet, squeeze your butt, and then extend your arms. And make sure you tuck your chin on the way down. And again, if that still doesn't feel comfortable, you can do another set of those arch ups that we did before. Totally fine. This is still a great exercise. Yeah, if you're in your wheel, do like 5 more breaths if you can. If you're doing the arch ups, do 5 more arch ups. Yeah, Dre, I love the drop back. Yeah. Good, if you're in your wheel, start to tuck your chin, lower yourself back down to the ground, and feel free to do a few windshield wipers with your knees from side to side. And if you're laying on your belly, you're welcome to, you can do whatever feels good for your spine, but it's also sometimes nice again to put the hands underneath your head and rock your hips from side to side also. Just whatever recovery feels good for your body here. And then one last back bend of your choice. Again, it could be a wheel, it could be a supported wheel with blocks underneath your hands, it could be another arch up, or you could do another set of those bridge up, squeezing your butt, lifting your hips, and you can do it with the outer edges of your feet on the ground again like we did before, or you can do it with your feet planted. They're both great. So 5 more breaths in whichever variation you just chose. Good, and if you're still in your wheel, tuck your chin, lower your hips back down to the ground, do a few more windshield wipers with your knees from side to side. And then 2 options here. We're gonna kind of reverse the action of the spine. You can either, the easier option is just hugging your knees into your chest, wrapping your arms around your knees, and then kind of like lifting your hips up off the ground just a touch to kind of get your spine to hollow a little more. Or a second option is lifting your hips up towards a plow pose and feeling a stretch through your spine, as long as this feels good for your neck and shoulders. We'll spend about 5 breaths in either one of those variations. Make sure it feels good. And then nice and slow, vertebrae by vertebrae, roll your hips back down to the ground. You can use your hands on your hips if you need support, or you can push your hands flat on the ground, whatever one works for you better. Yeah, good. And then drop both of your knees to the left for a twist. You can let your chin rest over your right shoulder. Take 5 deep breaths. And then let your knees drop over to the other side. 5 more breaths. And then take another minute to do anything else that your body is yearning for right this moment. It could be anything. And if you feel complete, you're welcome to make your way back up to sitting. And that completes our practice today.